2,320. The U.S. leads the world with serial killers at 2,320. The other following 15 top countries total up to 792. That means the U.S. has 2.9 times as many serial killers as the top following 15 countries. Now this intrigued me. I was thinking, why does the U.S. have so many more serial killers than the rest of the world? So I decided to look into it. There's a graph to show that. So first thing we had to do is define what a serial killer is. So the generally used description is a person who has murdered at least 3 or more people in the span of a month with cool-down periods in between each killing. The FBI and other sources generally lower that number from 3 down to 2. So now that we have a description, we can look at some of the broad motives. And as you can see, you've of course got your revenge killing, your financial kills, but overall, the majority is for enjoyment. Lust, power, all that, and that really intrigued me. So I decided to take a look in depth at 4 in this category. First up, we have H. or also known as the Hitchhiker's Killer. He started killing in 1969 and was around 80 hitchhikers in Californian coastal roads. After that, Ted Bundy, who killed around 30 women. He was famed for keeping at least 12 of his victims' heads as trophies. And he was known to be so evil that even a person on his defense team said Ted was the very definition of heartless evil. After that, Paul Knowles. He was also known as the Casanova Killer because he was so charming. He was famed for charming his victims before he killed them and had killed at least 18 people, but the kill count might be higher. And lastly, I decided to go with somebody who is not from the U.S., Chikatilo. And he killed at least 53 people and was famed for the quote, "When I used my knife, it brought psychological relief. I know I have to be destroyed. I was a mistake of nature." So now that we have a brief overview of them, I figured we should look into their childhoods. Starting off with Gaskins. His mother was very neglectful to the point where there's a story of how he first heard his first name in his first court appearance because he had the nickname Pee-wee, and that's all he heard before that. He would receive regular beatings from stepfathers and other men entering his life. And when he was very young, he went on a crime spree with 2 of his other friends. And they ended up being caught, and he was sent to reform. This wasn't like a crime spree like going around punching people or stuff. They were robbing places and committing serious crimes. So he was sent to reform school. And in that reform school, he was said to have been bullied constantly and sexually assaulted a lot.
Good morning, staff. Just a reminder, today is our faculty meeting day.
So after that, when he was a few years after being incarcerated in that reform facility, he escaped and went to a traveling circus. In that traveling circus, he met a girl, and they got married and she was 13 at the time. And he decided that he would go back and finish his sentence at the reform school. So he went back and served it out till he was 18, then got out and ended up being incarcerated just a little while later into a real prison. There, he was sexually assaulted a lot, and so he decided that he had to do something about it. So he went up, and since he was very small of stature, he built the trust in one of the inmates and then killed him. Up next is Ted Bundy, who was raised by his grandparents till the age of 3. His grandpa was said to be abusive, and his grandmother was said to be timid and depressed. The crazy thing about this is that his mother pretended to be his older sister because she had him out of wedlock and didn't want him to go through all the stipulations that followed with that, all the bullying and stuff. So That was quite odd until he discovered his birth certificate and was said to hold a bunch of resentment for his mom for hiding this from him. His mother then married John Bundy, left with Ted, and Johnny adopted Ted. After that, it gets hard to know the facts because Ted was a very good liar and has told multiple different stories about his teenage years. Paul Knowles, up next. Not much is known about his childhood, as his father gave him up for foster care system when he was very young. And he had anger issues and was known for idolizing famous outlaw stuff. Andrei Chikatilo, who is a Russian. And he was born into the mass famine under Stalin, which says a lot. And he lived in a one-room hut with his parents. They rarely had sufficient food, and he said that they were oftentimes eating leaves, grass, to try to sustain their hunger. And then when World War II kicked up, his father went off to war, and he was left with his mother in a single bed. He was a chronic bedwetter, and his mother beat him every time he did it. And then a few years into the war, his mother had a daughter, and since the father was at war, it is rumored that the daughter was from a German soldier. This daughter was the one who gave an account of the mother and father, saying that the mother was abusive and neglectful, but the father was kind. So after World War II, he started attending school, where he got bullied because of his malnutrition and ratty clothes. But he overall did pretty good in school. And into his teen years, he started developing a social awkwardness, especially around women. So now that we've looked a little bit into each of these people's childhoods, I figured we should compare them. And something that I noticed a lot was that most of these killers had abusive parents, especially mothers. The U.S. killers had a tendency of going to juvie early, reform schools, and then staying in prison a lot in their early lives, whereas Chikatilo had a very clean record throughout his childhood and was regarded as a good kid. Gaskins and Knowles spent multiple times throughout their earlier life, past 18 in prison, in and out. Bundy was even caught and escaped a few times, but Chikatilo evaded capture for quite a long time before he was caught. So obviously, American society has something wrong with it, whether it's a foster system, an inefficient justice system, or chains of abusive parents. But I believe as a nation we can come together and work through these issues. Thank you.